a voice of rescue with a word to rescue for your training and overcoming, entitled Trained, Not Troubled.
This is message number 16 of the 300 series, His Time, Our Position. This rest for our soul keeps us from bowing down in our soul. Because when we find rest in our soul, we find rest for our lives to live freely, to be restored, to be renewed, and to be refreshed in the face of trouble instead of being troubled, because we have become skilled at God's ways and we have learned to cast the care of trouble into the care of God's hand. And so we don't become resentful. We don't become bitter and indignant and annoyed over the trouble. We maintain our joy from and through our connection to Jesus, our true connection to God, our resting place. Because in Jesus, we are in a state of refreshing, and this allows us to be blessed. And so we become blessed and not bitter, because we stay engaged. We stay joined to the blessed one, to the victorious one. We remain agreeable to God and His will, His way, His plan, and we do not become disengaged. Our position is to keep company with God through our walk with Jesus. The Phillips translation of Hebrews 4 verses 10 through 11 reads, "And he who experiences his real rest is resting from his own work as fully as God from his. Let us then be eager to know this rest for ourselves, and let us beware that no one misses it through falling into the same kind of unbelief as those we have mentioned." Rest indicates that we are settled, steady, and established through our agreed, joined, secured, attached residence, obtained from our connection, our habitation of living and abiding in Jesus. This is our home. We are at home in Jesus, and Jesus is at home in our hearts. And so we are raised. Our position in God is a raised position, and it is the outcome of us believing in our heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. And so we are raised because Jesus is raised, and so we don't fall into unbelief. This allows us to be at rest. The Amplified translation of Hebrews 12 and 15 reads, "See to it that no one falls short of God's grace, that no root of resentment springs up and causes trouble, and by it many be defiled." We look up to God and rise up because we seek to know God's rest for ourselves, since doubt and unbelief is disobedience. It is an uncooperative disposition, and it represents that we have fallen short and missed God's mark. We cannot go over God's power and authority ignoring God's grace. This keeps us bowed down to trouble. It causes us to go under. We either overcome by coming up and over to God's way, because we cannot rise up without entering God's rest. If we do not come to God in times of trouble for rest, we permit a root of bitterness the permission to grow up in our hearts. Forsaking God's way of doing things hinders our success. It prevents us from functioning the way that God created us to, because with no sure or secure footing to stand firmly and walk safely in trouble, we are absent of the strength that we need.